As you can see, you better turn this up again. As you can see, I'm still at war with Jack. I've got my jacket on. Also, I'm glad that he always seems to be following me, because he is an extremely hard man to follow. Once he is up speaking to you, why, it takes the wind out of the sails of all those who follow, so I'm sure glad I precede him. As Brother Ralph pointed out, that's our sword. You got to remember that. I'm not telling you to throw down your shotguns or your 22s or your Mini 14s or whatever it may be, but that is our main armament. We want to keep this in mind. Survival has been given a tremendously bad name. 2020 is just one of the examples. And yet everybody is a survivalist. Everybody. How many of you saw the movie or the video, The Silent Scream? Some of you here have seen it. Good. This is about the actual photographs that a doctor has taken, and the photographs are about the destruction of a baby and abortion. And one of the things that you will see there, if you ever have the opportunity to see it, and I think that you should definitely see it, because it'll give you a commitment, and that you will join the growing number of soldiers in Christ who are trying to stop that murder. But you will see that little baby trying desperately to survive. Everyone, every one of us is a survivalist. God made it that way. Down to the lowest amoeba tries to survive. And they really are truly trying to get you to just roll over and play dead. It could very easily be considered, and I believe that it is, a part of the Global 2000 project. They want as many of you dead as they can get. It's not scriptural for you to want to die. So everyone is a survivalist. You save for a rainy day. You put your shekels away, and you hope that if you get laid off, you got some laid away someplace that will get you through. You do all of these things. You have some form, either by law or by desire, some form of insurance, even though it is a part of the system. We are forced to have insurance on automobiles for PLPD and things of this nature, but you have some form of an insurance program either among yourselves. We're going to talk about that a little bit in one of these two sessions. That is so that you can survive. Many people here in the Midwest have storm shelters to take care of the tornadoes. Jack kind of wishes he had one down there in Mississippi to take care of the hurricanes, but it's a little more difficult. But why do you do that? You do that to survive, and yet people don't call you a neo-Nazi or an extremist or something like this because you want to go out and get into your survival shelter for a storm, a tornado coming. You have seat belts, and those of you who use them, you do that with the hopes of surviving. So, one last point. Why do you go to church? Why are you a Christian? Think about this. You are a Christian because you believe in Christ and the power of the resurrection. You're being a survivalist. That's what that means. I'd like to give you a joke. I'm getting used to this joke business. All preachers seem to to start these things out with jokes, and I might start liking this pretty soon. But there was a man, they were in the flood, terrible flood, I think it was over here in the Illinois River, and the water was rising, and he got up on his house, and the water was coming up, and it was up about to his chest, and over in the distance, along came a motorboat, and they saw him, and they came up, and they said, jump in, we'll save you. And he says, no. He says, I'm a born-again Christian, you know, and God's going to save me. Okay. So they went on off in their motor launch, and pretty soon another one came along, and the water by this time was up about to here, and he was beginning to start to stand up on his toes, and another boat came along and said, jump in, we'll save you. No, I'm a born-again Christian, you know, and God's going to save me. Well, the water kept rising. First thing you know, the water was up to where all he could do was put his nose out of the air just so he could breathe, and a helicopter saw him down there. And it whirly-birdied around and came on down and dropped the rope down and said, hang on, we'll pull you out, we'll save you. He says, glug, glug, no. He says, I'm a born-again Christian, you know, and he says, God's going to save me. Okay, so they tootled off. Well, the water kept rising. He died, of course. He went up to the pearly gates, and there was old St. Pete there, and remember my message last night about St. Pete and the pearly gates, but this is the story. And he said, let me in, and he did, and he says, I want to see the boss. Okay, so took him over to see the God. Said, God, why did you let me drown? He said, you know that I'm a born-again Christian, and yet you let me drown. God looked at him and said, son, you know I sent you 2 boats and a helicopter. So you see, we are survivalists. We need to consider it this way. We're living in an extremely dangerous and volatile period of time in the history of our people. I know that everybody here, you wouldn't even be here. You wouldn't even understand this if you didn't believe this. You read it everywhere. It's a sign of the times. The entire world banking system is nearing collapse. Banking collapse is one of the things that we're going to have to learn to survive. That will be discussed a little bit. We have weather modifications. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. This is a very important subject. We're going to have to learn how to survive this. Our farm families are near ruin. You know that from this part of the country. Even on national TV, you see farm families just being foreclosed constantly. And you saw that again on the 2020 strip last night, showing the desperation that these poor farmers have. And you have to feel for them. You know, your heart has to go out for them because they have been put into a box that they can't get out of. And they've been put into that box by the government and by the colleges and by the system. And now they're asking to come out, and the government won't let them. So they're near ruin. We have a threat of invasion. Of course, the threat of invasion perhaps is the strongest to the south of us, but they're all around us. And if they start, and I should say when they start, it will probably be first from the south, but that would then probably be the trigger to bring in those from other directions. We have enemy submarines on both coasts. We have enemy ships and submarines in the Gulf. And they're all within just eye distance of the coast, let alone distance of modern missilery. So this is a situation. We do have threat of war. Now, whether it is a nuclear war or whether it is a non-nuclear war, a limited war, a general war, I am not about to prophesy. It can go in any direction. It could escalate to a full-blown war. But in any event, once again, it is scriptural. Christ said that when you see these things, flee to the mountains. Now, I'm not saying physically pack up your belongings and head for the Rocky Mountains. I'm not saying that. There are many ways that we can, in a sense, flee to the mountains. We can flee to the mountains in how we do our living and prepare ourselves the best that we know how, and still live in your family lifestyle and in the lifestyle of the area of the country from which you came. And so that, I think we can take that somewhat loosely, but we must consider it. All right, so I'm going to break this down into two sessions. Today, if I may, I would like just to give a general overview of all of the classes of survival and just to touch upon it a little bit. Tomorrow, in the second session, I have some handouts that we're going to get down into some of the nitty-gritty and talk about some of the things that we really need to discuss. These handouts will be things that will give you checklists. I also have a booklet that I want to have. It'll be in a box and just a donation box beside of it just to cover my costs of publications on it. But it will be something that will be helpful to you, that will give you a little bit better understanding of the Second Amendment. And there's another book coming out now on that subject, and I'll discuss that. In fact, it's out, and I'll discuss that a little bit also tomorrow when we talk about this one. But today, I'd like to talk about some of the general concepts, the things that are going wrong, and what we must do about it. We have, as you very well know, a spreading of worldwide inflation. And we also, at the same time, have a worldwide depression. Now, I know that you feel, well, gosh, it's not all that bad, but you know they're keeping it propped up. You have an inflationary depression, whether you know it or not. If you don't believe that, go talk to the steel workers. Go talk to the copper workers. Go talk to the automobile workers. Go talk to some of the other mining industries. All of our heavy industries are dying on the vine. And this is not just by chance. But we must consider this. This is one of our problems. Now, why do we have the high interest rates in the United States? Think about this. That's not just accidental, you know, that the interest rates are where they are. There should be zero, of course. And until they are zero, we're in bondage. The servant is always in bondage to the lender. And the borrower is always in bondage to the lender. So until we get it to zero where God wants it to go, we're going to be in bondage. But why do we have this tremendously high rate of usury, high rate of interest? And we should, when we start talking about these things, we should use the word usury instead of the word interest. Because people out there on Main Street think that there's a difference. There is no difference. Interest is usury, usury is interest. And we must think of it that way. So, why do we have these high rates of interest? This causes, control now, foreign investment in the United States. They want foreign investment in the United States to prop the value of the dollar up in relation to the other currencies. This is an important point. Thus, it causes an inflationary recession or depression overseas. And if you think that we have it bad here, go into some of the other countries, particularly some of the more undeveloped countries, and you will see an inflation and a depression at the same time where people literally are starving to death, and yet they have buckets full of money. Now, when this imbalance takes place, the deficit here causes our heavy industries to go out of business. Now, it doesn't take an IQ of 160 to see that our automobile industry is dying. Every bit of our large industries are dying. I will show just a little bit about that a little later. Our copper industry. I come from the part of the country where most of our copper mines and the copper industry resides, and just this last week, the Sarco refinery in El Paso closed its lead smelting plant, It's been open for over 100 years, and they've closed it because the price of lead is so low, because we're bringing lead in from other places in the world. All right, so we have debts owed the banks, not us, not you and me. They're owed the banks that they made money out of nothing, and they have loaned them to these third world countries, and the debts are extremely high. So much so that they're not going to be able to repay them. There's no possible way for them to repay them. They try 1 year to restructure a little bit, and then the next year they come around and say, well, we need to borrow some more money to pay the interest on last year's, just like our farmers are having to do. And it's at the point now, you see, where communism and the enemies of our country are beginning to use this against us in a real way. Fidel Castro is now going all through South America, Central America, and Mexico, and he's using little old ladies, sewing circle associations and everything else down there to push his word, and I'm sure that he's using the Christian churches down there to help in this immensely, and I know they are, to push what he has termed a debtors cartel. And what they're doing now, these debtors are going to band together into a cartel and just simply stand it up and say, we're not going to pay you. Well, now, do you ever think about what that's going to do to us? It's going to cause one of two things to take place. We're either going to have, if our government decides to bail them, bail the banks, it's going to cause an inflationary situation so great that if you think the 1,000% in Argentina is bad, just wait. There's no possible way that the American public, that's you and me, can pay this debt. And yet that is what they will try to do, and they will try to monetize that debt of the foreign nations just simply to bail out the banks. The other thing they can do is to say we refuse to pay it. If that happens, you have a depression that will make the depression of the 29 and 30s look like a picnic. Because at that time, conditions were completely different. We had people who were capable of taking care of themselves much, much more. We had the American Christian ethic, and where each of us could take care of ourselves and our neighbors in a way that you can't do now. We have such an influx of foreign people, the stranger, within us that can't happen anymore. So it becomes obvious to me, in order to survive this, we must really seriously think in terms of getting out of the banks. They did it to you in 1929. They're going to do it to you again. Everywhere I go, whenever I hear people like Richard Hoskins beg you to do this, I have to agree with him. And I know it's very, very difficult. The convenience factor alone is absolutely tremendous. I recognize that those of us who have 1040s that we have to prove our deductions and so forth. The best approach is with the banking system, because those checks are the one document that the IRS will not argue with. Did you know that? They can argue with your books. They say, well, you just made that up. They can argue with your source material. Say, well, you just picked up source materials, your little receipts and so forth. You can get those anywhere you want, and so that's simple. But they can't argue with the bank. Why? Because they have a paper trail on those bank records that show that you actually did spend the money for an actual item or an actual cost. And so the check is an extremely good banking system, or an accounting system. It's the only one that they will abide by. And yet at the same time, I'm asking you to get out of it. So we have to develop a technique to do a better way to save ourselves, to be able to carry on our business and still do it at the same time. We should get into barter as much as we possibly can. Barter, did you know that 25% of the entire American economy is underground? That is larger than the gross national product of Canada. People are learning to get out of the system, and I encourage you here to do the same thing as much as you possibly can. Number one, the items that you buy are going to be cheaper. Number two, there are many techniques of bartering, and I don't mean by joining the National Barter Association or anything like that. There's lots of ways of doing it. Each one of you here may have a specialty, and each one of you, say that you're a plumber. You go to your family, your Christian church family, and you say, I'm a plumber. Put me on your list, and you are a dentist, you are a doctor, you are this, you are that, and we will exchange out. And this way, that's barter. Also, you have the technique of barter with your yard sales and your flea markets and so forth, because that really is nothing but a barter system, and you can actually trade at those. So it is that kind of thing that we want to encourage our people to do as much as is possible. Now, you know, people talk, Richard Hoskins has talked about it, other people have talked about it, about the coming exchange rate, coming exchange of dollars. There's no question but what they're going to do this. Lindsey Williams, in his presentation on the name of it is the Seduce Nation, is one that he talks in there very much about the details of how this is happening. All right, on how we can survive from that. Well, one of the things that you can do is to get your money, a sum of your money, goodly sum of your money, into hard coins. Now, I don't necessarily mean at this point that those hard coins have to be silver and gold. And this is the line of reasoning. All of the coinage is the only money that is legal constitutional money in the United States today. That's the only constitutional money you have. The government, the treasury, the mint makes that coin, and they pay it into circulation. A quarter is a quarter of whatever the dollar looks like. They will not, in my opinion, they will not go back to the mint when they change the green money to the pink money. That's a good color for it. When they do this, a quarter will still be 1/4 of that new dollar. And then if there is a devaluation process on the second exchange, that quarter is still 1/4 of that dollar. Because there is just simply too much coinage out there to do anything else but that. At least it will give you a period of time, a rubber band here to stretch a little bit to get whatever money you may have into a form that is useful to you in the future. So I would suggest that you purchase coins, even that clad, greasy money, because it's still a quarter or a half a dollar or a dime. So let's talk just a minute about weather modification. I know everyone here has heard of the Russian woodpecker. How many of you have not heard of the Russian woodpecker? Boy, a little bit. I think then if the rest of you will bear with me a little bit, I'll refresh your minds and give them a little bit of a touch on the Russian woodpecker. Back in the 30s, Nikola Tesla, a tremendously intelligent man, a genius, worked with Thomas Edison. In fact, they had conflicts on how to distribute electrical energy. Nikola Tesla was an AC man, an alternating current man, and Thomas Edison was a DC man, and obviously Nikola Tesla won out because he was able to prove that he could make high voltage transmission lines much more efficiently than you could direct current, because at the time, and still probably the case, you could only run DC current, DC generators to about 13,000 volts, and Nikola Tesla, with his invention of his transformer, could get up to 220, 240,000 volts and transmit power over long distances without any loss, without heavy cables. And so he won out. But he did many other things. He had a station up in Colorado where he'd run some experiments, and he could actually prove that he could transmit power to all parts of the world with 3 generators stuck into the ground. And then any place in the world, all you had to do is drive a certain type of a rod down in the ground and take your electricity out of it. Well, the powers that be didn't like that because you couldn't meter it. You know, you get out in the boonies, you can drive your own stick in the ground and get your own power, and that hurt them, so they decided against that. But he actually proved that this could be done. Other things that he proved that you could do with tremendously powerful but very low frequency alternating current generators, and you must remember radio is alternating current, just a high frequency. You got it down into real low frequency, around 10 cycles per second, and vibrate the whole earth with this 10 cycles per second in a certain phase relationship with one generator or another one, that you could actually create a change in the weather. And he proved this. And he has documentation, made patents on all of his works, and he has documentations in written form and so forth. So it was put to bed in the patent office, and of course we in this country for a long time have reacted to everything, and we have acted on nothing. We're just a nation of reactions. Whenever we're just like a little Dutch boy in the dike, a leak starts here and we plug it up there, and we come over and we plug it up here, and we don't have a long-term program, and we couldn't see the value of what Nikola Tesla was doing, and certainly we couldn't see the threat. So we had it as open property, and the Russians took it out of the patent office. The books published on the subject. So they can actually modify the weather, and they're doing it. You can hear it on shortwave receivers anywhere from 6 megacycles to 25 megacycles. You can hear it all the time, and you just tune across, and you can hear this 10 cycle per second staccato. Sounds just like a woodpecker pounding on a tree. And all the amateur radio operators do call it the Russian woodpecker, and so they know what it means. And it's there, and they're real clever, but of course it's a part of their technical program, the way it works. They will stay on a frequency and then slide about a megacycle or even less, and then come up again, and then slide a little bit more and come up again. And they do this with relationships to other transmitters in such a way that they create high standing waves or high, a meteorological high in a certain area, and then they change in the jet stream, and when that jet stream changes, you cause a change in your weather pattern. And they're doing this, and of course it's one of our problems. And you'll have to admit that since the late 70s, we have had extremely oddball weather changes that just can't be accounted for. Now, we have had strange weather in years in the past, but you don't have as many times in a single year where you will have record highs and record lows, and record highs on the same day with record lows in different parts of the country. You look at your TV news and this weather, and they'll say a record high and a record low for that date. And you look at it in your mind now and put it in your little computer, and you'll see that we're just having records after records broken. So there's a change, and it's caused by this Russian woodpecker. All right, so now what this means is crop failures. That's what it means. Now, right now, you look around out here and all this corn and so forth, and the soybeans is such a tremendous crop, so you say, well, that can't be. Hide and watch. They don't have it tuned yet. When they want it to happen, they'll have it happen. All right, now, to go with this, back in the 50s, the Green Revolution took place. We have the third world nations planting seeds that were extremely hybrid. And Mexico right now is suffering because of this, because of the weather changes. These Green Revolution seeds were predicated on the weather that existed from the 30s to the 50s, and it was an extremely warm period of time. These crops will not take cooler weather. You go back to open pollinated crops, And they are much more capable of insect resistance. They're much more capable of weather modifications, adverse weather situations. They can take drought, they can take more water, and things of this nature. Unfortunately, they don't have the yield. So our farmers, because they said, faster, you fool, they had to come to the hybrid to get the production so they can make a living. But it won't work when the weather goes berserk. And so one of the things that we have to learn to do is to purchase open pollinated certified seeds that will run true. Now, to show you that the establishment knows this, they are buying up all of the small open pollinated seed companies. Robert O. Anderson just closed up a couple more last year. It's becoming harder and harder to obtain open pollinated seeds. Now, in some of your grains, such as corn and wheat and so forth, you'll still have the open pollinated, and you can accomplish this. But I recommend to you, particularly for your garden vegetables, go after open pollinated seeds, get them in hermetically sealed containers, and put them away, and then at the same time utilize some to keep that open pollination and keep a replenishment of fresh seeds going, particularly your real fine seeds like onions and carrots and stuff of this nature. All right, so you want to store these certified open pollinated seeds. You want to learn how to grow home gardens. Just like I mentioned a little while ago, our people back in the 30s, in the Depression, everybody had a garden. I remember we had a garden and we canned tomatoes and carrots and potatoes and so forth, and we ate. The system is different today. We're all living in a high technological society down on Main Street or 3rd Street, and we don't have the capability anymore. America has become a nation that gets its potatoes out of a paper bag. And many people in this country don't even know where they come from and have the slightest idea and don't care. And so we in identity, if we are to serve our God and get our people through this potential Holocaust, we must, I don't like that word, this potential time of adverse troubles, we should definitely learn to grow gardens. Even in the cities, you can put a plot in the backyard and learn how to do it. And get your canning equipment back and get it greased up and ready to go and so forth, and have canning jars and be ready for this. They're inexpensive right now, and you can do it. All right, so farm families near ruin. You remember David Stockman here several months ago made a dumb statement. He said it was a national disgrace the way the American farmers had bid up this land. And they deserve everything they're getting, that there's no reason why the United States should bail them out. It's just simply a national disgrace, the way that our farmers were so stupid to do the things that they did. Well, it's not quite that easy. And he didn't make any friends among you farmers for saying that. It's not quite that way. We send our kids to the state colleges. The state colleges, which are funded by the federal government, said bigger and faster, you fool, to get better management, to get bigger equipment, to get higher yields, to go fence row to fence row and get with it. Buy all this expensive herbicide, insecticide, and so forth, and have that perfectly clean field and get the maximum yield, 150, 60 bushels of corn, etc., etc., and don't be satisfied with 75 or 60 anymore. All right, now, once this happened, they had to go after more land. When they have to go after more land, they bought it up, and they bought it up on a margin. Once they got it bought up on a margin, the interest rates, usury rates, went so high that they no longer could make the payments. And yet they were encouraged. They tried to keep up with the big boys, so to speak, and they were put into bondage. They had to go broke. They're going broke, one after another. Now, David Stockman made that statement, and yet at the same time, they're monetizing foreign debts. What about the $80 billion to Brazil? What about like amounts to Mexico? What about the gifts? We just finished giving $4.5 billion to Israel. Do you know what $4.5 billion would do for the American farm program? But you see, that's a national disgrace, what you did. Are you telling me that it is not a national disgrace to let our family farms go down and to give $4.5 billion to a bastard state of Israeli? Or to monetize debts to Mexico or Argentina just to bail out the banks? That is a national disgrace. We have threat from invasion from the south or from the north. We must learn to prepare for that. Tomorrow I'll go into some of the details on this. So let's talk about that tomorrow. And if the modus operandi remains the same in the way that they are going to do this, you have several types of guerrilla activity, as you might call it, several types of invasion concepts. In this concept of national wars of liberation, you have what you might call a platter, a plate. Let's take the plate and we'll put 4 cups on it. And you have economic invasion. You attempt everything that you can do to disrupt the economic message of it. You try to disrupt the social portion of our living. You try to disrupt the religious portion of our living, and you then have what is considered guerrilla warfare and terrorist activities as the 4th cup. But on that plate is the disinformation, and that's the part that your news media plays. Without the disinformation that the news media plays, the 4 other factors wouldn't even work. If they didn't tell you what they want you to believe, and that partial truth, half-truth, or no truth made into a truth, none of this would take place. They don't tell us what they should, and they do tell us what they shouldn't. And so that's the disinformation aspect that is the important key. Mao Zedong stated that a guerrilla was like a fish in water. And as long as he was in friendly water, he could survive. But whenever he got into unfriendly waters, he could not survive. That means that all of the terrorist activities, which is nothing but guerrilla warfare in the cities, or guerrilla warfare, which is the same thing in the urban countries, that's by definition, they cannot survive if they're in unfriendly waters. Much of the nation is now made up of friendly waters. Blood is thicker than water. You have, in our part of the country as an example, we have perhaps the most of our Hispanic people who are American first and Mexican second. No question about this. They love this country. They have fought and died in war after war in this country. There's no question about this. We must accept them. They're a part of America. They've been here a long time. Now, there are those, though, who are Hispanic, who are Mexican or Hispanic first and American second. We must quit kowtowing to these people. They are our enemies. We must start considering them our enemies. So there are many, many places in the United States where they have friendly waters for terrorist activities, for guerrilla activities. They will feed them. They will clothe them. They will hide them. I will have a book, a little booklet tomorrow called Get America Up in Arms, and it's written by Richard Fell, and it will be in a box in the back there tomorrow, and I'll discuss that tomorrow. But there's another one put out by Larry Pratt and Norvell Morton from Gun Owners of America called The Militias of the 20th Century. And they have gone down through and have shown you that there are militias in action right now that are far more free than the militias you have that you don't have in the United States. You're disallowed, in a great extent, a militia in the United States, and yet there are militias in the world right now operating for freedom without any control whatsoever from their government. No funds, no anything from their government. It's a book called The Militias of the 20th Century, and it's in publication right now. So either way, whatever we do, whether we take this saying, well, the best defense is a good offense, or whether we take it, let's just get lost and stay as low a key as possible, either way, you're going to have to determine your needs for personal protection, your food, your water, your medicines, and we're going to talk about some of these things tomorrow, your emergency fuels for heat and for transportation, and the money that you will need to survive. Now that money should be good money, silver and gold coins. That money, when that time comes, you must have some bean money. One little thin 10-cent piece that used to be worth 10 cents in 900 fine silver will buy you a lot of beans today. So you must get at least a portion of a bag or whatever you can afford of good, hard money. This is a survival technique. Now, I have just a few minutes. We're going to have to close. I'd like to talk, though, about a function that is taking place called the Delta Forces. We have within the United States a system now where we have about 500 highly trained, specialized troops called the Delta Forces, ostensibly for knocking down terrorism any place in the world. I question whether they will ever be able to be used any other place in the world, because any time that you have an army from one government entering into the purview of another land, you're in trouble because you now invaded that land, unless they invite you on. And many of the cases, they will not do this. These Delta Forces are psychologically selected, they're physically selected, they have no family, they have no one to leave behind, they have no one that can threaten them, and they are, you might say, pathological or psychological killers. They are trained to kill. They say, you kill that person, he kills that person. Now, the Delta Forces are the elite of the system that can be considered a part of Cable Splicer and Operation Garden Plot. This took place back in the 70s in California under Governor Reagan in California, and it was the start of the SWAT teams. Now, these SWAT teams don't always do what we think they should be doing. They took Arthur Kirk here not too long ago, unnecessarily, unjustifiably, and it is just one example of many that is taking place and will take place. All right, so we need to know about these things. We'll talk a little bit about it tomorrow. I want to show you a bullet, a cartridge that is 9mm parabellum Luger, that all of our military forces are going to the 9mm now. You know, they're leaving the 45 and they're going to a 9mm Beretta. That's a foreign company, by the way, and Colt and Smith and Wesson got left out. Anyway, they're going to this, but the Delta Forces have just recently purchased 3 million rounds of this bat bullet, and I'll describe that tomorrow to you, show it to you just as one of the things. It's a very interesting thing. It's somewhat of a smart bullet, but it doesn't meet the Geneva Conventions of war, so it can't be used in warfare, but they can use it. And so I'll describe that a little bit tomorrow and show you one. All right, so tomorrow I'm going to have to talk a little bit about the nuclear forces nuclear warfare exchange, and then we'll get into some of these details. So with that, this is just an overview and what I've done today to show you that we've got to learn to do this, and tomorrow we'll get into the details and we'll show how to go about it, and I'll have some handouts for you that will be very, very helpful for you. Thank you. On survival in itself, wasn't it? Medicine, our health, is a part of it, and we need to consider that. We'll talk just a little bit more about that in a little bit. Thank you. Yesterday, I wanted to cover just a little bit, before I had finished yesterday, on nuclear war survival, and I didn't get a chance to do that. I thought I'd start with that this morning to kind of finish up yesterday's, and then to go on with the rest of the discussion today. Now I'm going to have to move fast, so I won't put any fillers in or any butter on the bread, and I just wanted to just move on. We have in the back, and I want you people to get these. There's a donation box there, and you can put in whatever your heart moves you to put in there. I want you to have them, even though you may not be able to pay for it. There's some information back there I want you to have. Pick it up, take it home with you, and digest it. There's one book in there titled Get America Up in Arms. I had it published myself, some reprinted or typeset and published myself some time ago. And subsequently, Pastor Emery has it on his mailing list also, so you can get them from him. And there's a new book on the subject, Militias of the 20th Century. I described that yesterday just a little bit. But I want you to have that. I want you to have a checklist for survival needs. It's a very comprehensive checklist. You may not need everything that you see there because you may have it, of course, already, or you may feel that in your particular scenario it may not be necessary, but it's there for you to use as you need. There's some information there on an insurance program that I would like to talk about a little bit, and then there's a telephone tree concept there I want you to have available to you. It's a part of your survival scenario, your survival package, as it were. All right, now, one of the scenarios that we have to work with is a nuclear exchange. And I want to cover this just a little bit because a lot of people have tried to convince you via the news media that you can't survive a world nuclear exchange. This is not true. You can. You have to protect yourself. You have to know a few fundamental facts. You have to be able then to work fast and do those things that you have prepared for. I believe you remember the day after, it was a year or so ago, where ABC put on this documentary, quote unquote, and it was one which was for the specific attempt to scare you into believing it's better read than dead. This is not so. You will note in that movie, if you recall, the one person who did survive the exchange, the one family that survived the exchange, was that man who put that temporary shelter, expedient shelter, in his basement very rapidly, and he had to drag his wife and daughter down in there because they were going to get married the next day, and she didn't want to understand the problem. She was still going to get married the next day. Well, you see, we have to shift gears. We have been indoctrinated by the news media that you just can't do it. And these committees for concerned scientists and so forth talk about the nuclear winter that would occur. This is not true. We had a year in the United States of America in 1816 that was called the Year Without a Summer. And it was called by when Krakatau went high order in the Philippines, and another series in not the Philippines, the Indonesian islands. And another series of volcanoes erupted at the same time, and it put the equivalent of 300 cubic miles of earth into orbit around the Earth at high altitude, and it blocked out the sun rays significantly or sufficiently to actually cause it to freeze in July in the northeastern part of the United States and right here where you're living now. And people had to grub roots in order to survive, and yet, you see, they were survivalists, and they did just that. But had they even been forewarned, they would have taken steps to prepare in a little better shape. And that's exactly where we are today. We have got to realize that a nuclear exchange is a possibility and that we can survive, but we must be prepared. So we can do it on the cheap. It doesn't take that much money. Certainly it takes some money, but we will spend much more money practically yearly on things that are trivia than we would spend on the ability for you to survive a nuclear attack. If you wanted one book that will give you how to survive a nuclear attack on a bare budget, it's this book here, Nuclear War Survival Skills, and you can purchase that book now. This is a publication that I picked up from American Security Council some years ago. Crescent P. Kearney, Dr. Crescent P. Kearney published this, and he was working for Oak Ridge Laboratory in Tennessee, and he went on up to as high as President Carter to get this published by the government, and they wouldn't do it. And because it was a part of the MAD concept, the mutually assured destruction. I won't take any time to talk about why we're in the shape that we're in. I'm just going to try to show you how to get keep your life intact and so that we can come out on the other side to build the kingdom. But you can purchase this book now from America's Promise out in Phoenix, and I would suggest very highly that you get it. I'm sure that most of you already have it, but you can survive on the cheap if you do this. It won't take much money. One single bomb, such as Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and those were 20 KT bombs, 20,000 tons equivalent TNT, that one bomb each on these two cities, and it didn't destroy the city. One single bomb would not just wipe out a whole city. One megaton bomb would not wipe out Los Angeles. In fact, it takes 438 one megaton bombs to wipe out Los Angeles. So now we're talking about a factor here of 1,000. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not destroyed with one bomb. 100 yards from ground zero, people survived. There were bunkers within 100 yards of ground zero, and people came out the other side. They did not get burned. They were radiated, yes, but they survived and are living today. The ones that were killed because of direct burning effects. The intensity of that heat is tremendous. And consequently, if you even look into the fireball area and so forth, you're almost instantly blinded because it's a brilliance many, many times over that of the sun. It will blind you. And the heat that comes with that, in addition to the blast that comes with that, in a ground zero area. But you must remember that we're not all in the ground zero area. So the farther you can get away from what would be considered a target, the better chance you have of surviving. So it's obvious to me that one of the first things you should consider if you're living in the central heart of a big city that, and you know it to be a target, you should get out of there. And that is what I meant yesterday when Christ said, flee into the mountains. And you get out of that area and relocate and consider a change in your lifestyle. I beg you to do this if you're living in the big cities, to get yourself into a small town, a farm scenario, or anything of this nature. So you want to do this. All right, the bridges were open in one day in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The second day, the trains were running in those cities. The third day, the streetcars were running in those cities. All right, now, the Hiroshima bomb was 1,000 times less powerful than the one megaton bomb. And yet, what happens, you have a cube function, third power root. It takes 1,000 times more energy to double the distance of the destruction. So you see, you're running in a cube function, and rather I should say not double the distance, but 10 times the function. It takes 1,000 times more power to give you 10 times the increase in the distance. All right, so only a few of the 70,000 that died from Hiroshima and Nagasaki died from radiation. Now, that fallout will not kill everyone. There is a factor that we can take, and the military wants that up 200, 250, no more maximum. Rankin's equivalent in man, or REMs, that you can measure. There's devices that you can measure. You can buy these devices because, again, not only are they for sale on the retail market, but you can buy them as by going into yard sales. You have to look hard. You can find them, and into flea markets and things of this nature. Because when the government got rid of theirs, they out of the fallout shelters, they went to the open market. And you can purchase these devices sometimes quite inexpensively. So it's quite necessary that you be able to measure how much any one of you have taken. And there's a little device called a dosimeter. It looks like a little pencil, and you charge it with a little charger that comes with it. They're very inexpensive. You can buy them new for less than $100, and you carry it in your shirt pocket when you have to go into a nuclear environment. And you measure your dosage, and you record it in a little notebooks, and you don't want your total dosage to be up over 200 or so. And so you also have to consider that when you go into a fallout environment, into a shelter, you want your older people to do those acts where you have to get out and rearrange a pump for water, or to go get some more food or whatever it is from the pantry that's in the house, and you didn't get it into your shell or anything like that, because the older person has built a protection through the years, because there's radiation, nuclear radiation bombarding you from space all the time, just ever so little. And as you grow older, you have developed a protection against this, a natural protection. In addition to this, a lot of the effects of nuclear radiation takes 20, 30 years to actually show on a person. So if you're already 70 years old or so, you don't have to worry about it too much. And so you want to save your children. Now, that's high-class thinking instead of low-class thinking. You don't think about yourself. You think about your people. You think about your children, your grandchildren, and their great-great-grandchildren. So we want, as a race of people, to survive. And so this is the thing that you have to think about. The fallout will decline very, very rapidly, and it falls as an asymptotic rate. And some of these curves are in this book now, and so you can get this. You don't need to take massive notes at the moment, but it falls very, very rapidly, asymptotically, in such a way that it's on a kind of a rule of 7. And if the level of 1,000 units per hour is the initial, it will decline to 100 units per hour in 7 hours. So you see right there, you're down to a factor of 10 in 7 hours. And then it will drop another 10 in 7 times 7 hours, or another, it's a 7 rule, in 49 hours or 2 days. So you see, it falls very, very rapidly. Now, there'll be a little amount at the tail end of it that will stay there for some period of time, a couple of weeks or so. And so you have to be prepared to be in a protected area. Now, you can do this inexpensively. You can purchase buses. You can purchase vans. They're just that van right there out of the junkyard. You can buy those shells for $20, $25. You can buy a bus for $75, $100. And I know you go up and down the streets, the roads, see these junkyards, and you see shells. What are they going to do with them? They cut them up and send them in for scrap. And you can buy those for $75, $100, $150. And you can bury it into a hill. You can bury it into the ground. If the water line is too close, you put it on top of the ground and put dirt over it. If you have time, you want to encase it in concrete to make it a little bit stronger. But with that bus, there's a round top to it, and it is already bridged, and you can cover that with 3 feet to 4 feet of dirt. If you have some timbers to throw there with it, this would help you. And you can cover this and get that dirt over you. Now, if you have a good, solid basement, you can do that with the basement. You want to think in terms of the things that have to go into that. And of course, you have you have to have water. Obviously, you have to have water. And there's different ways that you can do this. If you're on a farm scenario and you have a well with a portable power plant, you can utilize that same well because that well water is clean. And you can utilize, if you don't have that sort of thing, then you have to store water. And there's all kinds of ways of storing water. The water that is in the hot water tank of your house is perfectly good. The water that is in the cabinet on a commode is perfectly good water. Any of the water that is in the pipes, if you can get that are there, that you can have closed off, because you don't want water, just open up your city water main and expect that water to be clean. It's not going to be clean. So you have to isolate that. But you then can, of course, go into storage of water in many different ways. Plastic bags, in any old container. Take any plastic bag and put it into a container that'll hold the sides to keep the water from popping the bag out, and you will have a storage of water. But obviously, if you have wells or groundwater real close to you, you can drive a sand point into most of the dirt around here with very little effort and get into that water, and a hand pump give you water right in your shelter. All right, so you have to think of those terms. You have to have your food, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. You have to have your filtered air, and your filtered air is quite easy to maintain and to obtain, and you don't have to spend tremendous sums of money to do this. Go down to a junkyard where they have big trucks wrecked, and to get the air filter off of a large 18-wheeler truck, tractor, and that filter, just go down and then buy a new filter for it, and a new filter for one costs about $30 at Napa or something like this, one of the parts houses, and you have a filter there that is good down to 1 or 2 microns, and this is very, very adequate. And with any form of a pump arrangement, you can work out quite adequately. If you have an exhaust system where you put one of these rotary turbines, and any amount of breeze at all, even much less than is going on right now, will turn that turbine and cause a suction action to take place, and that in itself will cause the air to go on through the input filter, and enough to keep you moving. And of course, old blacksmith forge filters, blowers, and things of this nature are very adequate. Even if you have battery type lights, etc., and you have to keep a battery charged, you can take the blower, these little squirrel cage blowers that are in heaters and in cars and stuff, and use those to move your air. But you have to have some energy then, of course, to replace that. One of the ways that you can charge a battery is to take one of these exercise bicycles, and now you're going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Take the exercise bicycle and take all that brake system off of it, and go down to the junkyard and again get a little alternator or a generator, and rig it up so that alternator or generator is that wheel that you're cranking with the pedal to give you the exercise is turning that alternator, and have that alternator or generator charge the battery, and then that way you can do both things at one time. And so you do need some exercise down there, and that would be a good way of doing it. So that is something that we need to think about. So you can survive a nuclear holocaust. There's no question about this. Don't let anybody fool you. There is much evidence going on now that even this idea of nuclear waste is so extremely overstated as to the problem of it. And there is work being done on this by some people with very, very good credentials. And when there's one man in particular is doing some work on this, and you want to listen to what he has to say and consider it very strongly. All right, so to go on now, we have 5 basic conditions requiring a survival scenario. One is economic, another one is weather, whether it be natural or man-made. And we talked a little bit about the man-made yesterday, and it is a real function, and don't discount it. Geopolitical is the 3rd one. War is the 4th one, and medical is the 5th one. Now, war, you've got to include terrorism in this. You've got to include guerrilla warfare in this, wars of national liberation, which use the 2 preceding. You have to consider regional conventionals. You have to consider a general conventional, and you have to consider a regional nuclear and a general nuclear. General nuclear being the worst condition. All right, now, along with that, you have to also consider the idea of gas. We know that just because the Geneva Convention outlawed the use of gas after World War I, we know that they are making plans for it. We know that they are preparing to protect their own troops. We know that our troops have extensive work in how to protect themselves for this. And yet, you see, it is always the general population in our communities that always take the brunt. You see, the military have preparations. They can take care of themselves. They have chemical, bacteriological, and radiological protection devices, CBR, that protect them. For example, on nerve gas, which is the probable gas that they will use. And it is very similar in structure to some of the insecticides that have been on the market, which are very, very dangerous, and the reactions are the same, and you have to use the same medical equipment or the medicines to counteract it. And generally speaking, it's a belladonna compound, and it's very, very potent in itself. But the thing is, what the military done is to show you now how we in the civilian population are at their mercy, and the military are protected, is that they have a small capsule that they carry, a little ampule that they carry, or several of these ampules. And if they get into a nerve gas scenario, they just jam it into their arm, and they inject atropine into their system. Now, atropine is a very dangerous thing, and yet at the same time, it saves lives. So it's a trade scenario. But what I would recommend that we do is to get some of our doctors thinking in terms of alerting the public and to study this for themselves, because many of the doctors I have talked to don't know how much atropine to give for which type of nerve gas and things of this nature. Our civilian population is at the mercy of the system. And just like with nuclear environment, simple taking of potassium iodide, which is a benign iodine, to load up the thyroid in an environment will cause the reduction of a tremendous numbers of deaths because of radiation. What happens is that the malignant iodine that would come from strontium-90 and other portions of a nuclear exchange, this very rapidly just goes to the thyroid, and it not literally but medically blows up the thyroid, and the body won't take it. And most of the deaths that were in Japan were caused from the thyroid destroying itself or being destroyed. And so by taking potassium iodide at the time of the threat, you can load your thyroid up, and it doesn't race to it, and you can save your life. And this book, again, has how much, where, and so forth and so on. And in addition to this, you can go to your pharmacist if you can get someone to allow you to get it. But you can take the potassium iodide in its crystal form, and it's very hygroscopic, and you have to keep it airtight and in dark brown bottles and all this, but 1 pound of the stuff will save the lives of thousands of people. And so if you want to be that good Samaritan to your fellow man, think in terms of obtaining some of this, and then you ladies and men also don't go trying to take some for weight reduction and stuff like this, because there's side effects that can happen under those terms, and that's the reason they don't want you to have it. They don't trust us. That's what it amounts to. They don't believe that we have enough integrity to use this stuff to save our lives. Now, I know that we in the identity movement do, because we are moved by God, and we have a right, a need to know these things. And it's the same way with this atropine situation. So you want to think about this. Now, in addition, on this medical situation, what are we to do in survival? We have the AIDS problem. We have the hepatitis problem. We have the herpes problem. We have the leprosy problem. With all of the infusion of the illegal aliens, the non-white people from other nations coming in here, they're bringing these diseases by the trainloads. We have tuberculosis increase. We have typhoid increase. All right, now, AIDS. We're scared to death to go down to to the hospital for an automobile wreck or anything else, for an operation that is necessary, and we're scared to death of the blood transfusion, and rightfully so. They say now that they have a test for it. Well, you know, also there's a problem religiously that we're not supposed to mix it. When Sheldon Emery had his heart problem and he was operated on open heart surgery for bypass, we talked about going down and asking the doctor, telling the doctor that we wanted to acquire transfusions from our people. He said that that was fine with him. In fact, he agreed with it. He liked the idea. And I said, well, why don't you push this? He says, nobody has asked me. Nobody has asked me for 20 years. And he says, you're the first people that have asked me to do this. He says, I'll cooperate with you. And so, what am I saying? We should start thinking in terms of typing blood, having information on each other, so in your communities, in your little groups, in your churches, so that when the time comes, you can do this. Now, what we did in his case was that we went down to the transfusion, where you give the blood, and everybody from the church and the area surrounding that belonged to the church went down and gave their blood, and of course they took the blood and then typed it. And so if you were type A and he needed type B or whatever, your type A just went into the bank. Well, fine. If you had type B and he needed type B, he then went over and that went over and was given directly in the whole blood to Pastor Emery. And it was a very warm thing to see the love for your neighbor as yourself in this operation. So it is one of the things that we need to think about. All right, now another thing that we've got to think about is the economic survival, just the ability to survive it all. I beg you to have a plot of ground clear of debt and with a house on it. All clear of debt. Now, if you have large properties, a farm, large farm holdings and so forth, try to do something to withdraw yourself back into a situation where at least you have a plot of ground and a house on it clear. Such a way that, and if several of you have to go together to acquire a plot of ground with a house on it clear, that's the way to do it. How you do it, there's many ways of doing it, but you can get that land clear. But now you know, just because you don't have your farm set up on your schedule down at the bank on that mortgage and so forth, they'll come and get something that you have clear somewhere else that's not on your financial statement, because there's such things as deficiency judgments. They want the turnip. And so you have to fix it up in a way to where your property is clear. All right, so as I pointed out, I have in the back there the list of the survival needs. I want you to pick them up. And at the end of this, if we have any time left, we'll have some questions and answers. And I know I'm not going to cover it all. It's impossible to cover it all. But now, what you want to consider is the storage of clothing. Let's take a look at the situation down in Central America right now. Those young men in the Contras and so forth, do you know what they need the worst? Boots. They're barefooted. And the conditions down there are so hard on boots, and when you start walking every place, the shoes you got on your feet aren't going to last very long. So what am I saying? Start storing these things. They don't have to be new. Where do you store them? Get barrels, these large open-top barrels. Get garbage cans, 30-gallon garbage cans. Instead of you mothers who have the daughters kind of outgrow a little dress, you don't have to worry about this with boys too much, because boys have holes in the knees and they're all worn out in the seat and everything else. They never wear out. I mean, they never outgrow them. They're all worn out in 2 weeks. So what you want to do, though, is wherever possible, even with the boys' clothing, of course, is to put it away. Don't worry whether that is your youngest child and you have a situation where you're not going to have any more children, and so therefore we can just destroy this and make a rag out of it because, you know, we don't have anyone else to pass it on to. You have a neighbor in Christ that you have to pass it on to. So you collect clothing wherever you go. Whenever you go to a yard sale, you'll see pretty little dresses. You'll see pants, clothes, coats, boots, shoes, socks, everything. 10 cents, 5 cents, 15 cents, quarter, and so forth. Right then and there, tithe. Buy up some of that stuff and bring it home and put into those barrels, and put a mothball or 2 or 3 in that barrel and so forth, and close it up. And do this over and over and over again to such a way, and get all of your neighbors in your little groups to do this. And then when the time comes, you got yourself a little country store, and you pass it out according to the needs of the people. And boots are very, very, very important. So you have to think in terms of, if you have shoes that have a little bit of wear or tear here, scuff here or there, and you want to throw it away and everything, don't throw it away. Don't burn it. Put it away. So you have to think of it along this line. Now, in there also, you have to put blankets and sheets and any of these things that are just plain necessary for everyday living. And that list again will be there. It'll be all inclusive, in my mind it is. And go down through there. And wherever you have the opportunity, pick these things up and store them. I talked yesterday about the barter system somewhat. On that barter system, use this. And I won't spend too much more time on it right now, but there's no question 25% of the American economy is now on a barter system or an underground basis. And people are coming out of Mystery Babylon, and they don't even know who they are, and yet they're coming out. So we got to help them on this. All right, now, one of the things, thou shalt not commit usury. Along with that, of course, we have the problem that we're not supposed to be in insurance either. And yet we've got to be. There has to be a way where we can, by participating in a program, help each other. And that's what insurance is for now. That's what insurance is supposed to do. But what they do is that they get back there with their big fancy computers and write out actuaries so that they're guaranteed a good profit. And they have laws backing them up, and then they loan you money from this. The biggest share of the houses on loan in the United States of America come out of insurance companies. And so it's all on borrowed money, it's all on usury money, and so you're right back into usury the moment you get into them. Now, we're required to have PLPD on our automobiles, so we have to have it. Do it. Either that, or like in the state of New Mexico, you can go down and put $60,000, deposit you have to deposit it. Not just a bond, but a deposit of that much money with the state treasury. Well, then they'll take it out and loan it to usury, so you're participating in a usurious system whether you like it or not. So that's not the answer. All right, now I have back there, therefore, a program called a Good Samaritan program. And it's a takeoff from the Mennonite program. On my mother's side, we come from a long line of Mennonites all the way back into Switzerland in the 1500s, and they have done something that's very, very beautiful. They work together on insurance, not only on health insurance, but they work together on fire insurance, hail insurance, any other kind of insurance that you can develop it into any area you want, any area that you can imagine. And what it is, it's not an insurance program. It's just a need program, and when the need arises, you all participate. Well, I went back to Pennsylvania several years ago to visit some of my own family homesteads several hundred years ago, and our folks are still there. And I asked one of the men, I said, Mr. Yoder, tell me about your insurance program. I said, how does it work, and how much does it cost? How expensive is it to you? And so the way it works is that each of the churches have what is considered an insurance person. He takes care of these needs. And he goes around to each of the members of the church and he asks them, how much do you think that you want to be insured for? How many dollars type thing? And man A will say maybe 100,000, man B will say maybe 50,000, go on down, and he'll sign up for this. And then he is given you might say, a rate per thousand, because it'll be a relative thing as to how much he feels his property is worth. And he pays nothing. And then he goes on, and all of a sudden, Farmer Brown down the road has a fire. Well, one of the things they do, of course, is to help each other rebuild in that fire, and that cuts down the cost somewhat. But not even discounting this, that insurance repays and buys the repair or the rebuilding of that house or barn or whatever. I asked him, how much are you having to pay? Isn't this a damage or dangerous thing? Don't you have to pay a tremendous amount of money? He scratched his head and thought a while, and he says, year before last I paid $17. And he says, then I think it was 2 to 3 years before that, he said, I paid something around $20, $25. He says, but I haven't had to pay any for a couple years now. Well, now how much are you all paying on fire insurance and so forth? Think in terms of this. The health insurance, the Good Samaritan program that I have back there is an example. It's out of Beech Grove, Indiana. And what they do, it's a Christian thing. It's non-insurance. You pay $75 a year, and that's to take care of the paperwork and so forth. And then when you have a need, you then can submit that need to the insurance, to the Good Samaritan house there, and they then send a letter out to everybody and say, this is your fair share for that person's need. Now, this is basically a health program, and of course, the card that you receive there is, they say, is generally accepted in most all of the hospitals. And so now there's one other factor here too, and that is that if you set up your own, or if Identity in general sets up its own and become one of the groups, they want it to have a groups of 500, you can also stipulate, don't you see, that you are allowed to use alternative medicines because it's not an insurance program. You see, Big Brother doesn't have anything to say about it. And so if you want alternative medicines as your method of doing it, number one, it's to the advantage of all your fellow man, because alternative medicine is generally cheaper than having to go into the high-priced hospitals and so forth. And if that is your heartfelt need, and that's what you believe in, such a type of program will allow you to get around the system of insurance and still have some protection that will allow you to do this. All right, now, also in the back, I have a telephone tree. What I mean by telephone tree is that in time, in need of time of danger and so forth, you are obligated to call so many people. The Kahil works this way. It has been said that the Jewish community, the Talmudic community, can contact everybody, their people in the world, in an hour and a half. Now, I don't quite believe that. I don't think you can do that, because somebody's home, not at home, he's out fishing on a lake, they can't contact him. But that couldn't be true. But generally speaking, they say they can get across the world in an hour and a half. And it's worked on a telephone tree system of 7. Ours has not worked on quite that system, but it's a telephone tree. You're there, you give a call to those people that are next to you, then they in turn go on down and call, but the one that's up on the head knows if that call is not made, he can call the next one on down, and so you don't miss anybody. A telephone tree is a very, very important thing, and I think that we should think in terms of this. All right, so this kind of considers is considered a part of what you would call your community defense. That telephone tree is a cardinal point in that community defense. You have to be able to protect each other and to provide for each other this way. So that is that telephone tree, just a form. You copy them off and give them to your people, and you do it this way. Communications is a very, very necessary thing. Number one, every one of you should have a shortwave radio. Every one of you should have a minimum of a shortwave radio. And particularly you want a radio that is capable of receiving between 5 megacycles and 30 megacycles. You want that region, because the reason for that is that all of your international broadcasts are in that region somewhere, generally between about 7 megacycles and 18 megacycles. And it is in that area where you will get your things like BBC and Radio Free Europe and so forth and so on, but that's not necessarily where you will want your information. You can get good information from stations in South America and stations all over Europe and in Africa and in Asia and so forth. You'll hear news that you never even thought possible was going on in the world. And so from that point alone, you need it. And then certainly you need the capability at the time to be able to communicate, at least listen to what is going on behind the lines, so to speak. The ham band stations will still, the ham band frequencies will still be a very strong cardinal point in the communications system, because it will be those ham band frequencies that more people will have available to them transmitting equipment to be able to communicate. You have to think of this. CBs on the local area is fine as long as you can just about throw a stone to the person, you can just about talk to him. So, but that is a very local thing, and you can communicate back and forth. You don't even need a license anymore. Just buy the gear. So, and you can, by making it a little bit more exotic, sophisticate the equipment a little bit, do a little better than that. But if you want communications in your local area, every one of you farmers here are authorized businessmen. And you can just simply go to the federal government, get your business ban, and a farmer, in fact, is allowed, farmers and ranchers are allowed what is called the industrial bans. It's and all businesses like plumbing shops and things of this nature aren't even allowed on those industrial bans. So you can utilize those frequencies for your business, but golly, you got some utilization there that's far broader than just for your business needs. And so you want to think of it along this line. All right, now, one last point, and we'll then have some questions, perhaps, if we have the time. And this is something that is a very touchy subject to most people. They just don't want to, they shudder to think about it. They don't even want to talk about it and so forth. But survival has got to be also race survival. Miscegenation, mixing of the races. You had better start thinking about this. If you have children in the public schools, if you send children to churches other than your identity churches, they're going to pump this into those kids over and over and over. Billy Graham says, won't it be nice when we're all a nice shade of brown? And now, that's what he said. Now, if we are going to survive, we must think in terms of race survival. Tell your kids, show your kids. At the time we had children in that impressionable age, the best, we didn't know identity. And the best that we could tell them, was that we were bigots. There was something in our minds, in our hearts, that came down through the family. My mother and dad taught me. My grandmother and granddaddies taught them. Same way with my wife. But we did it through, you just don't do that. We didn't have a biblical reason because we didn't know who we were. Now we do. We should make tremendous pressures in this area. Stay clean with your kids. All right, now, are there any questions? Yes, Tom.
On the communication subject, what about the possibility of linear amplifiers in times of emergency? Nobody's going to put on TV radio.
Yes, recognize that when you have a situation where there is no government, there is no regulation of that type. I mean, and even so, it's just like driving an automobile. If a 14-year-old child is out on the road with parents and one of them they both had a heart attack or they had a wreck or something like this, and he could take them in another automobile or that automobile, he can drive without a license. They're not going to. It's a situation when you're in an act of war, an act of national emergency, so forth. You just go ahead and do it and don't even worry about the repercussions, because generally there won't be any. They're going to be too busy doing other things. Yes, that's a good point, Tom. Linear amplifiers on CB is a very common thing. You can buy them. Gosh, most of these CBers all have them anyway. They're running 1,000 watts and 2,000 watts and all this anyway. So I think that's a very good point, Tom. Yes, sir.
I come in fairly on that water thing, but somebody gave the information before, not here, somewhere else, that you should take your empty crude jars
Yes, that's a... Yes, anything, that's a very good point, and I thank you for that. He stated that that he had heard somewhere else where you have your fruit jars for canning and so forth. After you use them, you empty them out, clean them, sterilize them, and fill them full of water, put a cover back on them, and then put them downstairs. Now, obviously, that cover, that little, your lid, will probably rust on you and would not be usable for canning then. You have to understand that. So when you do this, you will be using one of those little tin lids, but that's no problem. You just buy enough to keep in storage for future use. But that's a very good point. Yes, Paul?
How important would it be for us to own these police scanners? How much of this are we going to hear from the Highway Patrol and the Sheriff?
You're going to hear all of it. FEMA has planned on utilizing the state police frequencies, the sheriff frequencies, and that is the way that they will get down through their people to set up roadblocks here, to set up whatever, a detention facility there or whatever. And so scanners are very important, and there are documents sold, even at Radio Shack you can get them, and you can get them also through Popular Communications. There's an organization that puts out this type of thing, and you can get frequencies that are used by the different governmental agencies, military agencies, the Department of Justice agencies, and these things they're available to you, and they go right down to by the cities, and each city has its own frequency, and you just look at your city and plug it in, and you get this.
So what I was thinking about is, had Gordon Call been listening to a scanner, or Arthur Kirk listening to a scanner, would there have been a police blackout, or would they have been able to hear that they were coming?
They probably would have been able to hear. In fact, Gordon Call, I understand, was very meticulous about this, and he had done this time and time and time again. And this is something else I want to forewarn you. It's a part of your survival scenario. They will do this. They'll cry wolf, they'll cry wolf, they'll cry wolf, and then all of a sudden you let your guard down, and then there is a wolf. And that's a good point. And that's exactly what happened to Gordon Call. He let his guard down. They had scanners, and they had those scanners in operation, and they knew that they were after him. He knew that. And so he did take a little bit of protective maneuver there by getting back in the second car and so forth, but of course it blew up on him, as we all know. And had he had scanners, he could possibly have averted that shootout up there at Medina, and he may have been alive today. Yes, sir?
A lot of these scanners, you have to buy a crystal, and they're hard to get, and especially if they change the switch. They have a scanner out now that you can program them.
Yeah.
And put anything on it.
You want to purchase the programmable scanners, not the crystal scanners, because every time you change a frequency, you got to stuff another crystal in, and they're rather expensive. Bearcat, there's others, Montgomery Ward, a bunch of them. They're mostly made by Bearcat back in Indiana here, and they're good, and they're very, very useful. And so you want to have that situation and taken into account. Yes, ma'am. Well, all right. That's a good question, ma'am. Does shortwave pick up all frequencies? Well, number one, the scanner is not capable of receiving all frequencies either. And the receiver, the general coverage receiver I discussed a little while ago, is not an all frequency coverage either. I specified get a good receiver, not any junkie now. A good receiver that will put you between 5 megacycles and 30 megacycles, and that's low frequency, really. But it is a frequency that is extremely useful for long, long distances because there's skip involved. It bounces off the heaviside layers and things of this nature, and so you have the opportunity to receive stations a long way off. All right, now. These police scanners are generally in the VHF and the UHF region. We're talking about up above even the television frequencies. You're talking, now they do have a section in them where you can plug in, punch the buttons in to program frequencies from 30 to 50 megacycles. It'll be FM. The receiver I'm talking about down between 5 and 30 is an AM receiver, because that's where what most of those stations broadcast in. This FM between 30 and 50, and they skip all the way up then to about 100 and go all the way up into the 500 megacycle region. Well, police frequencies generally operate up in the 150 megacycle region, and then again in the 450 megacycle region. So that's the type of receiver that these programmable scanners work on, and so that's different. You want that sort of thing up there. So really, you're talking about two receivers, a programmable scanner that you can plug in the frequency you want, and you can change those frequencies if you find that, well, that one isn't very active, and I got another one over here that's got a lot of good stuff on it. Plug that in. Okay, so that's the two receivers that you would need. Yes, Doc.
Earl, there's a source of maybe some products in catastrophic things maybe should mention, especially in rural communities and smaller areas away from large hospitals, and assuming that supplies are going to be cut off for things. But in every veterinary hospital across the country, there are volumes of survival type drugs, bandaging material, all the type of stuff that there's really need for antibiotics and so forth. It's a great source of products that, and the only difference between them in nearly all cases is the dosage or whatever.
Yes.
So it's something I think people might want to keep in mind.
That's a very good point. And that brings up, yeah.
Because so many of them are so large, where they're treating, especially in large animal areas, they have so many volumes, they're exported like most hospitals. They're equipped with a lot of material.
And a lot of this stuff you can buy from these supply houses without prescriptions and so forth, and they're very useful and very needed, much needed. And yet if you went into a doctor's office, by law, he can't give them to you, even though his heart is in the right place, he can't give them to you. Is this not so?
That's also
Yeah.
And many, most veterinarians can get all those products.
Sure. Well, is it not true that most veterinarian products, generally, what they do is recycle some of the stuff that is on the shelves in a pharmacy for human use? They bring it on back and put it back into use in the veterinary areas. Is this true, or it's not true?
The only difference, if it's penicillin, for example, it's just a matter of labeling.
Okay, it's just, no, there's, all right. Yes, but the stuff is perfectly usable. Yeah. Yes, good. And incidentally, in such emergencies that we're talking about, like Doc Stevens right here, who is a veterinarian, he can set a bone on a human being under the conditions we're talking about, just like he can on a horse. And when that time comes, your veterinarian may very well have to be your doctor. And they understand this. I mean, you've got to encourage the relationship there and so forth to understand this, because there's not going to be enough doctors go around. Believe me, there's not going to be. Yes, did you have a question?
What is your thought on dehydrated foods?
Yes, very, very much so. They're expensive when you purchase them. Yes, what is my thought on dehydrated foods? Yes, very, very much so. They're one of the finest ways, and in fact, if you are having to be in a situation where you feel that you may be in the field, and a lot of our people will be in the field, and that means you have to run with packs and light, and the dehydrated foods are very, very important. Nitrogen-packed foods are very important. They're a little bit expensive, but they go a long way. All you have to do is add some water.
Earl Johnson asked a question I can't answer, and maybe you all just give us a stronger question or announcement.
Yes.
It's something that Colonel Von Stahl, or General Von Stahl,
Go ahead.
also
Go ahead.
A couple of years ago on television, they showed pictures of kids at a CPDL conference throwing jackknives into the ground. Remember that? You remember what they said about it? These identity people are teaching their children knife techniques and teaching them to hate the blacks and to hate the Jews. At that point, I got pretty disgusted. When you teach your children anything, naturally the news media will come down on you hard, but we have overcome that. Our son, for the last 3 years, has belonged to the Civil Air Patrol. Now, that's an air rescue organization for teenage boys and girls. They'll send them to Blue Beret survival training camps free of charge. Usually, service organizations like at home, the Optimist Club foots the bill. It's a community thing. They think it's great for these kids. They give them CPR training. They go down to the fire station. They learn all of this stuff. These kids, well, I'll brag a little bit. My son saved an old lady's life the other day, and he's delivering his papers at a paper route. But what I'm getting at is here we have this type of training for these kids. You want to send your kid to camp?
That's right.
Let's do it and something like that and have them learn something.
It's a good point. Thank you, Paul.
And Colonel Von Stahl is one of the high-ups in Civil Air Patrol in Omaha area.
So that's a very good point. Take that note of that, and to go along with that, you also want to consider participating in the system to this degree. You must consider doing your part in cleaning up the police activity. You can do this by going to your local sheriff, and where it is ever possible, where he will even permit this sort of thing, is to participate in the reserve program. And the purpose there is to teach them the difference between SWAT-type activities and sheriff's activities. What that sheriff is supposed to do. We can go in there and educate a sheriff what his responsibility is as to the highest elected office in the county. He doesn't answer to the county commissioners. He answers to the people. The sheriff's boss is the people, and he has the common law that he is to administer. And he can do things that if the district attorney and so forth even thought that he had the power to do, they would try to re-educate him. So we must educate these sheriffs that they are the boss in the county when it comes to law enforcement. And so you can join those organizations with the thought of teaching. It also gives you an input as to what's going on. You can work the ends against the middle here on this operation a little bit. And it's a civic duty, just like that Civil Air Patrol is a civic duty. And you see, he's gaining the Blue Beret technique training, and all of us can do that. And also, we can come back out of there with good information. I think that you should consider this. Are there any other questions, or are we out of time? Got 4 minutes. Yes, ma'am. Yes, thank you very kindly. Have you all heard what she had to say there? She said that in the communist countries, all of the children from the age of 10 up receive a nuclear survival training. I have a book right there in one of my briefcase, the Soviet textbook on nuclear war survival. They teach their people in all their satellite countries and in the Soviet Russia itself, they teach their people how to survive. They have an extensive underground system over there. And you just can't imagine what is being done to us. They are cheating us out of our lives and out of the lives of our nation and out of the lives of our grandchildren by denying us this information. And I think the point is a very good one. Here we have just a few people comparatively here to spread this word. But can you see the responsibility that is on your shoulders? These people there in Russia, they have national test days where they all run and hit their holes. And we haven't had that since Robert Strange McNamara took all of the crackers and the water and the radiological detectors out of those holes and threw them away. But the one thing they didn't throw away were those little triangular signs that said, fallout shelter. And they've got you fooled. There's no fallout shelter there. You can't have a hole in the ground without water and bathroom facilities and something to eat, because you have to be there a long enough time. They'll kill you. And then they come up with the Crisis Relocation for America plan. And you know what that spells as an acronym. And so you have to consider these things. That's a good point, ma'am. And I think that we in some of our identity conferences should start thinking about this. Little exercises. And yet, if the news media saw this, they would absolutely go ape. Can you imagine ABC taking a camera picture, a VCR picture of some kids putting on gas masks? It would be horrible if you think that throwing the jackknives into the ground up at CPDL got the blow up that it did. But it is a necessary thing. And by the way, you can buy gas masks dirt cheap. You can go into these places and buy them for $18, $20, even cheaper than that, 10, 15. And you better think about this. I think we're out of time. Thank you very kindly. God bless you all.